I learned long ago that the most memorable conversations rarely announce themselves. They arrive softly, like a porch light flicking on as you pass by. Tonight's walk after my son's party started as small talk and turned into a moment I still carry with me. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. The house had just emptied. Paper plates leaned into one another on the kitchen counter, and the music we turned down hours earlier hummed in the walls like an afterthought. My son was gathering leftover cups with a broom handle rhythm, gently teasing me that I'd tried to feed an army. When the last laugh faded and the last car pulled away, the night air felt big and kind, the way it does after good company. "Let me walk you a bit," Eli said, lingering in the doorway. He was my son's friend, the polite one who always carried chairs without being asked, who said thank you as though the words had weight. The porch light cut a soft circle on the steps. I hesitated, then grabbed my cardigan, more for the habit than the chill, and stepped out beside him. Our street wore the quiet like a shawl. Sprinklers hissed somewhere, and the moon was a thumbprint on glass. We walked slow, matching strides, as if neither of us wanted to disturb whatever it was that had followed us out of the party. Eli stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets, glancing at me from time to time, as if measuring the moment for the right words. "Your peach cobbler was a hit," he said first, "an easy opening." I laughed, telling him how the recipe came from my neighbor back in Missouri, a woman who taught me that patience is a spice. We drifted through small memories. My son's first Little League game, Eli's failed attempt at grilling last summer, the way the neighborhood cats formed a silent union atop worn car hoods. The breeze carried that faint, damp smell of watered lawns, childhood and midnight, and something bittersweet. When we reached the corner where the streetlight hummed, he slowed. "Can I ask you something?" His voice was careful, the way people sound when the truth they're carrying is precious and a bit heavy. "Of course," I said, surprised by how steady I felt. Maybe it was the night. Maybe it was my age. There's a calm that comes when you've lived enough to recognize the shape of a turning point. Eli stared at the curb for a moment, then up at the sky. "I'm not great at saying things the right way," he murmured. "But I wanted to tell you that the way you talk to people, it changes rooms. You make it feel like there's a safe place to put whatever you're holding." I blinked at him, a little taken aback by the sincerity. Compliments usually skim the surface. This one reached down and touched bone. "That's kind of you," I said. "I just try to listen." "That's the thing," he replied, a slight shake in his breath. "My mom used to do that. She could listen like she was tucking you in. Since she passed, He stopped, swallowed. "I didn't know how much I missed that feeling until I started coming around here." We stood beneath the streetlight, a moth circling our little world with tireless faith. I felt the careful distance between us, the good, respectful kind, and also the thread that had appeared, thin and bright, running from his heart to mine. Not romance, not anything that would ask for more than we could give. Just a bridge across two shorelines of loneliness, held together by trust. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "Grief is a long road, and it doesn't like to walk alone." He nodded, and the shine in his eyes made him look both older and younger at once. "I guess I didn't want to say it in front of everyone," he added, a small smile ghosting across his mouth. "But I wanted you to know that what you do matters." We turned toward home. The night thinned. A distant train called out like a memory remembering itself. Eli told me a story about his mother teaching him to fold towels in thirds because halves were for people in a rush. I told him how my father used to fix broken things with ugly tape, and a gentle patience that made ugly tape seem heroic. By the time we reached my porch, the porch light had cooled to a softer glow. We didn't rush the goodbye. We stood there a breath longer than necessary, not because anything more was promised, but because we both understood we had arrived at a small harbor. He thanked me for the food, for the party, for the listening, and I thanked him for the walk. When the door clicked shut behind me, the house felt different, like someone had opened a window in a room I'd forgotten. I rinsed plates in the sink, letting the water run steady, and realized that sometimes the conversations that find you on a quiet street are less about answers and more about learning how to hold the question without fear. And maybe that was the talk I hadn't expected. Not about the past or the future, but about the small, steady courage of being seen exactly where you stand. The next morning began with the soft weight of silence. I had thought the walk with Eli might simply fade into the background of memory, but instead it lingered like the faint scent of flowers pressed between the pages of an old book. I found myself replaying the way his words had slowed, how his eyes had searched for steady ground in mine. Something about it had shifted the way I looked at him, at myself, and even at the house I had lived in for years. As I cleared the remnants of last night's party, folding napkins and stacking cups, I noticed how the light streamed differently through the curtains, casting long ribbons of gold across the floor. Ordinary things suddenly carried weight. The scrape of the broom bristles across the tile, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Even my own footsteps felt louder, as if the house were listening. I couldn't quite explain it, but it was as though Eli's honesty had peeled back a layer of quiet I had been living under without realizing. Later that afternoon, I saw him again. He came by to pick up something my son had left in the garage, a set of speakers, still tangled in their cords. I'd almost let him come and go with nothing more than a polite nod, but as he stepped back toward his car, I heard myself calling out, "Eli, wait." He turned, eyebrows raised, waiting with the kind of patience that felt older than his years. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," I told him, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. "About your mother and about listening. It meant more to me than I can put into words. I don't want you to think it slipped past me." He gave a small smile, one of those rare, unguarded ones that made him look almost boyish. "I wasn't sure if I said too much," he admitted, "but I needed to say it." I gestured toward the porch. "Stay a moment. I've got coffee." It wasn't planned. It just came out, as natural as opening a door. He hesitated only a second before agreeing. We sat outside, mugs warming our hands, the late sun painting the neighborhood in shades of honey. The air was thick with the smell of cut grass and the faint tang of barbecue drifting from somewhere down the block. Eli spoke about little things. His classes, the odd jobs he was juggling. And then, in the quiet between his words, he began to talk about his mom again. How she had taught him to drive in the rain because she said life never waits for perfect weather. How she had a way of turning even the worst days into something manageable with nothing more than a patient glance. I listened, really listened, the way I had once listened to my own son when he was younger and thought the world was too big for him. And somewhere in his stories, I saw the outline of something larger, grief, yes, but also resilience, and the need we all have to be witnessed in our stumbling. The more he spoke, the more I realized that what he sought wasn't answers but presence. He needed someone to hold his words without rushing to mend them. At one point, he paused, staring down into his mug. "Sometimes I feel like I'm walking around with half a map," he said softly. "Like I know where I'm supposed to go, but the road keeps changing, and she's not there to tell me I'll find my way." I reached across the small space between us and touched his hand, not tightly, not possessively, just a gentle press, a reminder that he wasn't alone in that moment. The map doesn't disappear just because someone isn't there to read it with you, I told him. You've still got the roads, even if they feel unfamiliar. His eyes lifted, meeting mine, and there was gratitude there, deep and unspoken. The kind that doesn't require words, because it's written in the way shoulders ease, in the way someone finally exhales after holding their breath too long. We sat there until the sun slipped low and the air grew cooler. When he finally stood to leave, it wasn't with the weight of sorrow, but with a quieter step, like he had set something down. I watched him walk away, carrying both his speakers, and I hoped a little less loneliness. As I closed the door, I realized that his words had shifted something in me too. For years, I had been moving through routines, content to keep my days orderly and predictable. But Eli's honesty, his vulnerability, reminded me that life still had rooms waiting to be opened, conversations waiting to be had, no matter how unexpected the timing. That evening, I found myself looking forward not just to tomorrow, but to the possibility of being surprised again. Not by grand events or sweeping changes, but by the quiet courage it takes to share one's heart, and the grace of being trusted to hear it. The week unfolded slowly, carrying with it a rhythm of ordinary chores and quiet moments. Yet beneath that everyday surface, I felt a subtle shift. It was as though Eli's words had left a trail of echoes in my mind, reminding me that life's most important connections often begin in the gentlest ways. I found myself looking forward to the chance encounters that might follow, not with expectation, but with a kind of openness I hadn't felt in years. On Friday evening, my son invited a few friends over again, and the house filled with familiar noise, laughter tumbling down the hallways, the thud of sneakers abandoned near the door, and music played just loud enough to blur into the background. I busied myself in the kitchen, stacking plates and offering snacks, but I caught Ellie's eyes once or twice across the room. They carried a recognition, quiet and steady, that said he hadn't forgotten our walk or our porch conversation. Later, after the group began to scatter, Eli lingered. My son had disappeared upstairs, promising he'd be right back, though I knew that could mean anything. Eli offered to help me clean up, and I accepted. We moved side by side, rinsing glasses and stacking bowls, the kind of teamwork that doesn't need explanation. There was something comforting about the rhythm, him drying while I washed, the soft clink of dishes punctuating our small talk. At one point, he set down a plate and leaned against the counter. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day," he admitted, his voice low enough that it felt private even in the empty kitchen. "About the map not disappearing. I keep going back to that." I paused, turning to face him. I meant it. Sometimes we forget that just walking forward is its own kind of progress. He nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "You have a way of making hard things sound less impossible." The words warmed me, not as flattery, but as acknowledgement. I realized then that what he sought wasn't advice. It was reassurance that the ground beneath his feet was steady enough to hold him. And in some way, I found that reassurance for myself, too, reflected back in his trust. When the last of the dishes were done, I suggested we step outside for a moment of fresh air. The night was cool, a thin veil of clouds moving lazily across the sky. We stood on the porch, the wooden boards creaking softly beneath us, and let the quiet settle around us. After a long pause, Eli said, "You know, I don't talk like this with many people. Most of the time, I just keep it all in. But with you, it feels different. Like it's okay to let things out without worrying how they'll sound." I met his eyes, and in that instant, I saw the weight he carried, not just grief, but the unspoken pressure to be strong, to be composed, to carry more than most his age should. "That's what listening does," I said gently. "It makes room for someone else's truth." He let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, though tinged with emotion. I guess I needed that room more than I realized. We didn't say much more after that. We didn't need to. The silence between us was no longer empty. It was full of understanding, of something quietly shared. As he left that night, I watched him walk down the street, his figure fading into the shadows until the curve of the road carried him out of sight. Inside, I sat for a while at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the stillness. I thought about how unexpected it was, this bond that had formed, not out of obligation, but out of honesty. And I wondered if perhaps that was what life kept trying to remind me, that even in the later chapters of our lives, there are still pages waiting to be written, still voices waiting to be heard. It wasn't about answers or solutions. It was about presence, about standing side by side in the small hours and realizing that connection, unexpected, unplanned, but deeply real, was what made the journey feel less lonely. The days that followed felt calmer, as if a storm had quietly passed without fanfare, leaving the air clearer than before. I found myself moving through routines with a lighter heart, watering the plants, folding laundry, sweeping the porch, all the while holding on to the memory of those conversations with Eli. It wasn't that anything dramatic had happened between us, but rather that something subtle had shifted inside me. A week later, another gathering filled the house. The clatter of shoes on the porch, the rise and fall of voices, and the energy of young people spilled into every corner. I kept myself busy, smiling as I set out food, but I could feel Eli's presence in the room like a steady current. He wasn't loud, wasn't vying for attention, just there, kind and consistent, and when his eyes met mine, the acknowledgement was enough. When the night wound down, he offered once again to walk me outside. I hesitated for a moment, aware of how much those walks had come to mean, but I nodded. The street stretched ahead, quiet and lined with lampposts glowing like watchful sentinels. The sound of our steps against the pavement was almost rhythmic. This time, Eli didn't rush into words. He walked beside me with a kind of ease, as if he trusted the silence to hold us until the moment felt right. Finally, he said softly, "You've reminded me that being heard is enough sometimes. I don't need to have everything figured out." I glanced at him, the streetlight catching the thoughtful lines of his face. "None of us ever really have it all figured out," I replied. "We just learn to keep moving, even when the road feels uncertain." He nodded, then stopped walking, turning slightly toward me. "I just wanted to say thank you for listening, for not brushing me off. You've given me something I didn't realize I was missing. A kind of anchor." The word stayed with me, heavy yet comforting. Anchor. I thought of my own life, of how many times I had longed for one too, especially in moments when the days blurred together with quiet loneliness. And I realized that this connection wasn't just for him. It had given me something as well. It reminded me that I still had the capacity to matter in someone else's story, not by doing anything extraordinary, but by simply being present. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder, steady and respectful. "You've reminded me too, Eli," I said, "that even at my age, there are still moments worth being surprised by. Life doesn't stop offering those if we're willing to notice." His smile was soft, carrying both gratitude and relief. We walked the rest of the way back in companionable silence, no need for more words. By the time we reached the house, I knew this talk would be one I'd carry with me, not as a dramatic turning point, but as a quiet marker of growth for both of us. That night, as I closed the door and leaned against it, I felt a peace settle over me. It wasn't the kind that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind that comes from knowing that in an ordinary life, extraordinary moments still find their way in. Moments of trust, of honesty, of being seen. And maybe that was the greatest gift of all, that an unexpected conversation on a quiet street after a simple party could remind me that even in later years, life still holds space for discovery, connection, and the courage to let ourselves be changed by it.